First and foremost, as the pandemic emerged, the gaps in rural connectivity really came home to roost. When kids have to learn online, when doctor's appointments are online, when people are starved for social interaction, the gap in digital access is a clear precondition to long-term community resilience. We've learned really that challenge is twofold. Maybe we were slow to the table on that one, but I think it's crystal clear in terms of that twofold challenge. One is the infrastructure challenge, like getting the connections to the end of the dirt road. The other is the financial challenge, the financial accessibility of access to of technology. Can you afford a tablet? Can you afford a laptop? Can you pay a monthly fee for an internet service provider? And the state, through philanthropy and public policy, is going to have to get a handle on both aspects of those challenges for us to become more resilient in the long term. The second area of focus is really around rural entrepreneurship, Fran. The idea of disparate economic activity by region, by place across the state means that for philanthropy, there's an opportunity to seed new business creation, new startups, and the strength of downtowns. And if we can do so, we can be a part of building more resilient communities over time. I think there's a really important lesson coming out of the pandemic that rebuts one of the orthodoxies of business over the last period of decades, and it's that the orthodoxy was that consolidation and concentration and aggregation made a business and an economy stronger. And the reality as we emerge from the pandemic may be from a community standpoint that distribution and disaggregation and spreading out across geography and across places and having a high number of new business creations and a high number of growing businesses creating economic activity is a platform for strength and resilience over a long term. The third area of focus really is around food system resilience, and we're aided in this conversation by our key partners at the High Meadows Fund. But it's another example of where that bias towards concentration at a national and global level really revealed itself to be weaker than we might have thought. The question in this space, and you're going to hear from a panelist who was instrumental in this effort as a partner in a few minutes. But the two questions really were, how do we pivot our local food system and sustain the lessons of pivoting our local food system into food access and feeding our neighbors with healthy local food? But also in the longer term, how do we ensure that the families and businesses that are working on the land, that are providing that food, that are fostering that level of local security around food access, are able to be economically secure in the long term as well? How can they thrive and be successful in the things that they've chosen to do, on which we need to rely in a pandemic environment, and on which we rely on a daily basis over the course of the year? The fourth area of focus, Fran, was around our demographics, how we create welcoming, equitable, and anti-racist communities. We have an aging population in Vermont. We have negative net migration among 18 to 44-year-olds. We have an overwhelmingly white population. And yet, if you look at the younger generation, it's increasingly diverse. So the question is, how do we position our communities to be places of access, potential, places of opportunities for new Vermonters, both for people who don't currently live here, but those who live here who don't necessarily feel welcome. And there's abundant examples in the news on a near daily, unfortunately, basis for that understanding to take root. In my view, it's less a question of welcoming than it is a question of belonging, and what philanthropy can do to set the stage for communities to which all Vermonters feel like they belong and feel like they have the potential to be economically and socially secure, successful, and have the ability to take care of their families and take care of their neighbors. So we've seeded a strategy that focuses on building anti-racist communities as a mechanism for addressing that long-term demographic challenge, which is an economic thing, but it's also a moral compulsion for us as a state and a set of communities. The final area we focused on was really focusing on learners and transition, really attentive to the dislocated workers disrupted by the pandemic, and also the graduates of high school in the class of 2020, whose future was thrown into an incredible amount of uncertainty, led by the J. Warren and Lois McClure Foundation and their commitment to the class of 2020 early on, when very little was known about what people were going to do or how they were going to react. That commitment was an astounding promise to a class that really changed behavior on a lot of young people and offered some certainty at a time when not much was certain. So we built a strategy addressing that chronic and systemic workforce challenge in Vermont, creating clarity around pathways to education and opportunity across training providers, across educational providers, and with key partners across the state that really change the landscape of understanding and affordability for the pathways that lead to economic opportunity in Vermont. So with each of these initiatives, the issues underlying them in Vermont communities are systemic. They predate the pandemic. That we were asking the question, what's the role for philanthropy and what's the role for a community foundation in addressing them across Vermont communities with an eye on the long term? And we believe that doing so is fundamental to the long-term resilience of Vermont communities as we come out of this pandemic and we face the years ahead.